She looked me in the eye and said, "You're too young." I should have walked away. But instead, I whispered back, "And too ready to love you the way you deserve." I hadn't been back to my friend's house in years. Life has a way of scattering people. We finish school, drift into work, lose touch. But when I pulled into the familiar driveway that evening, it felt like time had folded in on itself. The porch light was on, the same flowers bloomed in the front yard, and I almost expected my old friend to swing open the door, grinning like we were still teenagers. But it wasn't him who greeted me. It was her. His mom. She opened the door with a surprised laugh, the kind of sound that instantly carries warmth. "Oh my goodness," she said, eyes widening just slightly. "Look at you, it's been so long." For a moment, I didn't know how to answer. I had remembered her kindness, the way she always made us feel at home, but standing there now, I realized how much I hadn't noticed before. She hadn't really changed. If anything, time had only added a kind of quiet grace to her presence. Her hair framed her face elegantly, and there was something in the way she held herself that drew me in, steady and unhurried. When she stepped forward to hug me, it was meant to be casual, just a mother greeting one of her son's old friends. But the moment her arms slipped lightly around me, everything shifted. Her cheek brushed against my shoulder, and I felt the faintest press of her hand against my back. It should have been nothing, yet I became acutely aware of the steadiness of her heartbeat against mine, the softness of her warmth. She pulled back quickly, smiling with genuine affection. "You've grown up," she said, tilting her head slightly, studying me with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. I tried to laugh it off. Guess time didn't leave me behind. The corners of her eyes softened as she stepped aside to let me in. The house smelled the same, a blend of fresh coffee, books, and something faintly floral, like her perfume lingering in the air. As I followed her into the living room, something inside me stirred, a realization I hadn't expected. She wasn't just my friend's mom anymore. She was a woman with a presence that made the room feel warmer, quieter, fuller. And for the first time, I couldn't quite separate the familiarity of the past from the new and unspoken tension of the present. She led me into the living room, and I couldn't help noticing how little had changed. The same framed photographs lined the shelves, smiling family portraits, a few travel snapshots, her son grinning awkwardly in a graduation cap. The cushions on the couch had been replaced, but the room still carried that comforting blend of familiarity and warmth. "Sit down," she said softly, moving toward the kitchen. "I'll make us some tea." I sank into the couch, letting my eyes wander. The sound of water filling the kettle, the faint clink of cups, these ordinary sounds felt unusually intimate, like I was trespassing on a moment not meant for me. A few minutes later, she returned, carrying a tray with 2 steaming cups and a small plate of biscuits, setting it down with the same graceful precision I remembered. We talked at first about her son, where he was now, what he was doing. She spoke proudly, but I noticed the faint sadness that lingered in her smile, the way her voice softened when she admitted she didn't see him as often as she'd like. "And you?" she asked, looking at me over the rim of her cup. "What have you been up to all this time?" I told her about my work, the struggles of early adulthood, the small victories and quiet disappointments. She listened with genuine attentiveness, nodding slowly, her eyes fixed on mine as if every word mattered. There was no polite pretense in her listening, she really heard me. And that did something to me. Because in that silence between questions, in the way her gaze lingered, it felt like she wasn't just seeing who I had been, but who I had become. At one point, she reached for the sugar bowl, and when she passed it to me, her fingers brushed against mine. It was a light touch, accidental, gone almost as quickly as it came. But it lingered. The faint warmth of her skin seemed to stay with me, echoing in my chest. I caught her looking at me then, just for a second too long, before she lowered her eyes and smiled into her cup. The conversation continued, about books she was reading, places she wanted to visit, the little things that made up her days. But beneath every word was an unspoken awareness, a current we both seemed to feel but neither dared to name. And as I sat across from her, sipping tea that was already cooling, I realized the small talk wasn't small at all. It was the careful bridge being built between who we once were, and whatever we were slowly becoming. The tea had gone cold by the time silence settled between us. Not the comfortable kind, like earlier, but something heavier, charged. She placed her cup back on the tray with a soft clink, her fingers resting there a moment longer than necessary, as if she were gathering courage. When she finally looked at me, her smile was there, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You know," she began, her voice steady but quieter than before, "it feels strange, sitting here talking with you like this." She paused, as if measuring her words. "You're not that boy who used to raid my fridge anymore." I gave a small laugh, trying to ease the tension. "Guess I've upgraded a little." Her lips curved, but only faintly. Then she shook her head and looked down, her fingers knotting together in her lap. "You're too young," she said simply. The words hung in the air like a wall dropped between us. Something in my chest tightened. It wasn't anger I felt, not disappointment either, just a quiet ache. Because her tone didn't sound dismissive. It sounded like someone trying to protect herself. I leaned forward slightly, elbows on my knees, searching her face. "Too young for what?" I asked gently. She looked away toward the window, her profile caught in the soft lamplight. "For this," she whispered. "For the way you're looking at me." Her honesty stunned me. My throat tightened, and I didn't know what to say at first. She wasn't wrong, I was looking at her differently. Not as a friend's mom, not as someone older, but as a woman whose presence pulled me in more with every second. "You've got your whole life ahead of you," she continued, her voice firmer now, though I could hear the tremor beneath. "You don't need complications like me in it. People would talk. It would never be simple." Her hands twisted together, betraying nerve she usually hid so well. And in that moment, I saw her not as someone untouchable, not as a figure from my past, but as a woman quietly struggling between what she felt and what she believed was right. I wanted to reach across the space between us, to take her hands and still them, to tell her I didn't care about simple. But instead, I sat in the thick silence, my heart beating loud in my ears, knowing this was the first crack in the armor she had carefully built. She had spoken the warning. And now, everything that came next would either prove her right, or prove her wrong. Her words still echoed in the room, "You're too young." She sat there, posture composed but fingers restless in her lap, like she was holding herself back from something she didn't want to admit. The lamplight traced soft shadows across her face, and I could see the quiet conflict flickering in her eyes. I took a slow breath, steadying the weight in my chest before speaking. "Maybe you're right," I said softly. "Maybe I am young compared to you. But that doesn't mean I don't know what I feel." Her gaze flicked up, sharp and searching, as if she hadn't expected me to answer so directly. I didn't look away. "I've been sitting here," I continued, voice low but steady, trying to convince myself that this is just nostalgia, or something fleeting. But it isn't. Every time you smile, every time you listen the way you do, I paused, the words trembling in my throat, "I can't ignore it anymore. I don't want to ignore it." She drew in a breath, almost inaudible, her lips parting as if to interrupt, but nothing came. I leaned forward slightly, not enough to close the distance but enough to show her I wasn't hiding. "You said I'm too young. But I'm too ready to pretend this doesn't matter. Too ready to walk away from something I've never felt so strongly before." The room seemed to hold its breath. Even the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen faded into nothingness. All I could hear was her breathing, shallow, uneven, and the pounding of my own heart. Her eyes searched mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw the wall she had built tremble. Her hands shifted, one brushing nervously across her knee. I wanted so badly to cover it with mine, to anchor her. But I stayed still, knowing this wasn't about reaching forward, it was about letting her see me, fully and without hesitation. Finally, she exhaled, shaking her head slightly though her voice softened. "You don't know what you're saying." "I do," I whispered. The honesty in my tone seemed to startle her more than the words themselves. Her lips pressed together, her eyes glistening with something. She quickly blinked away. She looked away toward the window again, but not before I caught the faintest quiver in her expression, not rejection, not dismissal, but fear. Fear of wanting something she wasn't sure she was allowed to want. And in that silence, after my words had settled, I realized something: I hadn't pushed her away. If anything, I had drawn her closer to the truth she was fighting to hide. After my words, the silence didn't break immediately. She sat still, her shoulders slightly tense, her hands folded tightly in her lap as if she needed something to hold on to. I stayed quiet too, knowing anything I added now would feel like pressure. Finally, she rose from the couch, smoothing her palms down her jeans in a small, restless gesture. "I should clear these cups," she murmured, gathering the tray as though the simple act of washing dishes could shield her from the storm inside. I stood too, instinctively. "Let me help." She gave me a quick glance, the kind that said she wanted to refuse but couldn't find the words. So she simply nodded, carrying the tray into the kitchen with me following close behind. The kitchen light was softer, warmer than the living room. The kettle still sat on the stove, faintly steaming, and she moved to the sink, running water over the cups. I stood beside her, close enough to feel the faint brush of her sleeve against mine. It was ordinary, washing dishes, standing shoulder to shoulder. But the air between us wasn't ordinary at all. Every movement felt charged, every silence louder than it should be. She reached for a plate, but when I stepped forward to take it from her, our fingers overlapped. Just for a heartbeat. The warmth of her skin against mine shot through me like an unspoken truth. She stilled, her breath catching. I felt it more than I heard it. For a long second, neither of us moved, as if the simple contact had tied us in place. When she finally let go, the dish slipped into my hand, but the ghost of her touch stayed with me. I glanced at her then. Her profile was turned slightly away, but I could see the faintest rise and fall of her chest, quicker than before. Her lips parted, as if she might speak, but no words came. I wanted to close the distance, to reach out, to let my hand settle over hers again, this time deliberately. But something held me back. Not fear of rejection, not doubt of what she felt, but respect. Respect for the struggle written quietly in the slope of her shoulders, in the way she gripped the edge of the counter like it anchored her. So I stood there, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her, close enough to sense the hesitation pulling at her heart. And in that hesitation, the tension only deepened, wrapping around us like a quiet promise waiting for the courage to be spoken aloud. When the dishes were done, she dried her hands with a towel, her movements slower than usual, as if she were buying herself time. I stood there, not wanting to leave the moment but not sure how to move it forward either. She finally turned, her expression softened, and gestured faintly back toward the living room. "Come on. Let's sit for a while." We returned to the couch, but this time she didn't sit at the far end. She lowered herself beside me, not too close, not too far, just enough that the space between us felt deliberate. The lamplight washed over her features, gentler now, as if the earlier tension had shifted into something quieter, more vulnerable. For a while, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint ticking of the old wall clock. I could feel the warmth of her presence radiating against me, and my chest ached with the need to say something, anything. She broke the silence first. Her voice was low, almost hesitant. "It's been a long time since I've really talked to someone like this. Someone who listens." I turned toward her, meeting her eyes. There was something raw there, a softness that caught me off guard. "You deserve to be listened to," I said. "More than you realize." Her lips parted in a faint smile, though it trembled at the edges. "You don't know how much that means." "I think I do," I whispered. Her gaze lingered, and I could feel the weight of everything unspoken building between us. My hand rested on the cushion between us, and after a long pause, she lowered hers there too. For a moment, we sat like that, almost touching but not quite. The pull was unbearable. Finally, I let my hand shift, just enough to cover hers gently. Not forceful, not demanding, just a quiet offering. Her skin was warm, her pulse quick beneath my thumb. She drew in a sharp breath but didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand ever so slightly, allowing our fingers to intertwine. The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was full, of words unsaid, of feelings finally breaking through the surface. She looked at me then, eyes glistening in the lamplight. "You make me feel," she stopped, her voice faltering. I leaned closer, close enough to hear the faint tremor in her breath. "Feel what?" Her lips curved into the faintest, most vulnerable smile. "Alive. And I don't remember the last time I felt that way." My heart thudded so hard I thought she might hear it. And in that moment, I knew, neither of us could go back to pretending. Her words, "You make me feel alive," still lingered in the room, fragile and trembling, as if speaking them aloud had cost her something. I didn't move right away. I was afraid that if I shifted, the moment might collapse. Her hand remained in mine, warm, delicate, her fingers curling just slightly as though testing the safety of being held. Finally, she let out a soft laugh, almost self-conscious. "You make it very hard to say no," she murmured, her eyes dropping to our joined hands. I smiled faintly, my thumb brushing across the back of her hand. "Then maybe don't," I whispered, my voice carrying no pressure, only a quiet sincerity. She looked at me again, really looked, and I saw it all, the strength she carried, the vulnerability she tried to hide, the longing she'd been denying for far too long. Her eyes softened, and though her lips pressed together as if to form another protest, none came. Instead, she sighed, a gentle exhale that sounded like surrender. Slowly, she leaned closer, not dramatically, not in some sudden rush, but carefully, as if giving herself permission one small step at a time. Her head came to rest against my shoulder. The weight of it was so slight, yet it felt like the heaviest, most meaningful gift she could give me. I didn't move, except to tighten my hold on her hand, anchoring her to the truth that she wasn't alone. Her hair brushed against my jaw, carrying the faint scent of her perfume, floral, comforting, something I would never forget. I felt her breathing even out, slow and steady, like she'd finally allowed herself to rest. Neither of us spoke for a long while. The silence wasn't tense anymore, it was soft, protective, almost sacred. Every sound, the tick of the clock, the distant hum of traffic outside, only emphasized the stillness we had created together. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of her presence sink into me. My arm shifted just slightly, so I could rest my hand over hers where it lay against my chest. Her fingers tightened, holding me back with a quiet certainty that spoke louder than words. There was no need for promises, no declarations. Just this closeness, this unspoken acknowledgement that whatever had sparked between us was real, undeniable, and something neither of us wanted to run from anymore. And as the night stretched on, I realized that sometimes love doesn't arrive in fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the stillness of a living room, in the simple act of a woman leaning her head on your shoulder, and finally allowing herself to be held. Thank you for listening to this story. If you felt the warmth of this slow burn connection, let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you'd like more age gap romance stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe and join me for the next chapter of love, told slowly and tenderly.